standing on the road that goes into Simsboro or the Mount Pleasant community. But it was along this road that black people from the Simsboro and Mount Pleasant community got their firearms and took up positions in the trees and along the brush, expecting the white mob to come down this road. After Floyd Gibson killed the two men at the Gibson house, racial tension reached an all-time high, and hundreds of white people gathered back at the general store at the end of this road, threatening to come into Simsboro and wipe everyone out, in particular to get and kill Floyd Gibson. The black community prepared for them, got their firearms, were ready for them to come down this road and for there to be a genuine race war.
It was June 3rd, 1922. The previous day, two white men had been shot and killed by a black man in the rural community of Simsboro, Texas. An armed white mob gathered at the turnoff to the only road into the small town. Groups of armed black men waited for them, behind trees and bushes on both sides of the road, ready to attack. This imminent race war was the crescendo in a series of horrors that began in Freestone County a month earlier. But how did it get to this point? How did this peaceful rural farming community with no history of racial violence become the epicenter of racial tensions in the United States? It started on an innocent Thursday, May 4th, 1922, a day forever etched in the memory of Little Curvin, Texas. This one-time boomtown, nestled in Freestone County, buzzed with anticipation. School had just ended, and graduation was the next morning. Eula, a young woman with dreams as vast as the Texas sky, had recently accepted Lawton Smith's proposal of marriage and was about to be the first member of her family to graduate high school. Skilled with a needle, her Aunt Rena meticulously sewed a beautiful white graduation dress for her. Anticipation buzzed through Curvin like a restless hive.
She was a very sweet girl. Everybody loved Eula. She was just had a real good personality. She was. Those king men worshipped her, really did.
All I know is the girl was going to school at Kirby. She would have graduated the next day. Would have spent the night in Kirby, but she had to go home and get her graduation dress.
But fate had other plans. Eula came home from school every day at 4 o'clock, but when she did not arrive by 4:30, her grandfather, town patriarch John King, sensed something was amiss. He sent a trusted farmhand, Ben Gibson, to look for her, and he found her horse tied to a bush, its saddle empty.
She was horseback. Started across this, I guess it was kind of a ditch, or they had to go down in it. It wasn't a bridge. These guys jumped up and caught hold of her horse, stopped, and she wasn't afraid of them because they worked for her grandpa. And the next thing we knew, they had everybody out looking for her.
King telephoned his sons, and a search party of concerned citizens began scouring the countryside for Eula. They retraced her steps, and beside a small stream known as Grindstone Creek, they found a scene that would soon unravel the entire community. A member of the search party, J.C. Watley, described how he and a local doctor named Whiteside stumbled on the gruesome scene.
Dr. Whiteside and me went down there, and we got out of his car, and we just started out. We saw something over there, and there she lay. and their head was beat in the ground till it was just flat across a hole in the ground that big around where they beat her head into that ground. We put out the alarm right quick, and John T. and Dr. Whiteside and me carried her up and laid her on the back porch of an old house. I held the flashlight, examined her, but they'd taken an old knotted stick, just jobbed her till they just tore all the pieces inside.
Near a footbridge over the creek, they found Eula's lifeless body. She had been stabbed repeatedly, her throat cut, her tongue sliced out, and her head stomped into the ground. Particularly shocking, she had been sexually mutilated with a knotted length of rough cedar. Footprints showed that at least 3 men had committed the crime. The sight affected the minds of the searchers in the manner that music can shatter glass. Early the next morning, search parties were formed, fueled by rage and grief. They were determined to find the guilty party. However, when it was reported that bloodhounds were being flown in from nearby Huntsville, one of the searchers unexpectedly and hurriedly left the posse and headed for his home. His name was McKinley "Snap" Curry, and he was a black man who worked for the King family. When searchers arrived at his home, Snap's wife admitted that he had come home the previous evening wearing clothes covered in blood. He then disappeared into the nearby woods. He immediately became the prime suspect. After a 6-hour chase, Curry was captured by another black man on a farm road just outside of nearby Wortham, Texas. Lacking a sufficient jail cell, he was placed in the vault of the Wortham State Bank.
Standing inside the vault of the Wortham Bank, Wortham, Texas, that was here in May of 1922, and it was this vault where we believe Snap Curry was brought after Snap had run away from the search mob in Curvin, Texas, after they had found blood on his clothes at his house and had identified him as one of the murderers of Eula Osley. From this bank vault, Sheriff Horace Mayo came over from Fairfield and took Snap out, we believe through a window, and tried to make a run for it, tried to get Snap to Waco so that the lynch mob would not catch him. But the lynch mob called ahead, they blockaded the road, and Sheriff Mayo was forced to take Snap to the jail in Fairfield.
We're in the alley behind the Wortham Bank building where Snap Curry was taken by the sheriff as the mob gathered in front. As you can see, the outline of this window here has been bricked up. At that time, though, we believe that this would have been accessible to the rear of the bank where the vault is located and would have allowed the sheriff to get him out without being seen by the mob.
Mayo's road to Waco was blocked, and he rerouted to the Freestone County Jail in Fairfield, which was also the residence of Mayo's family. At some point during the trip, Curry supposedly implicated 2 other black men in the crime, Mose Jones and Johnny Cornish, who were also delivered to the jail in Fairfield. A mob of more than 500 formed outside the jail. They broke in and carried the 3 black men back to Curvin. Wood and fuel were gathered, and there in a vacant lot between the Methodist and Baptist churches, each of the 3 was stripped, castrated, and then, one at a time, burned alive.
They just drug in some big old break-in plows, you know, the kind that you put 2 or 3 teams of horses to, up there right by where the, I guess it's more or less kind of from church. And they tied them to them and burned them up. Yeah, they burned them alive.
Dawn on May 6th revealed a smoldering pile of wood and debris around the riding plow. A photographer from nearby Mahia arrived and took a series of photos. More fuel was poured on the pyre and set ablaze. Dozens of spectators, some wearing their Sunday finest, watched until the embers cooled, then rummaged through the ashes to find body parts for souvenirs. The horror should have been over. It was not. The next day, a black man named Shadrach Green was found hanging from a tree. Rumors of armed black men descending on Curvin from Dallas circulated, and people prepared for battle. No black mob ever arrived, but white rage was not satiated. Over the next few days, an unknown number of blacks were killed. One was forced to dig his own grave and was then shot. Another was pursued by a group of white men on horseback. When he tried to hide in an outhouse, the riders peppered it with bullets until the unfortunate man fell out, dead. The sheriff of neighboring Navarro County, Walter Hayes, stated in 1966 that there was at least 20, could have been more. A bunch of niggers got together and signed an agreement not to work for whites. Every last one of them was hunted down and hung.
I doubt if the killing would have stopped if the Rangers hadn't come in. Still hunting and killing anyone that they thought that might even had something to do with it. Figured, well, the niggers was gonna come and raid the town. They lynched some of them, but I knew of the burning downtown, but they said they lynched. I don't know how many, but they said they lynched some of them.
Black people were afraid to be seen during the day and were afraid to sleep in their homes at night. Some kept their houses dark, and others slept outside in pastures for fear of being shot through an illuminated window. Some hid out in nearby creek bottoms. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, packed their meager possessions and fled, never to return.
Most of the colored people left there, Steve. After this all happened, so many of them were killed, they just drifted away.
Many of the whites committing the assaults were not local. Newspapers reported that as many as 2,000 men came in from places like Dallas, Fort Worth, Corsicana, and Houston to participate in the violence. Whites who were local had varying reactions. Some were proud of what had been accomplished, some were amused, and some were disgusted and ashamed. Perhaps the most common and counterintuitive reaction was fear. Just as antebellum slave owners were terrified of servile insurrection, like those that were led by Nat Turner, whites of the 1920s worried that blacks living under Jim Crow would finally decide that enough was enough and revert to violence. In and around Curvin following the lynchings, residents concluded that they were about to become targets for retaliation. Whereas scared blacks sheltered in dark houses, scared white families insisted on keeping every light in their homes turned on at night. Rumors ran rampant that mobs of armed black men were descending onto Curvin from Dallas and other places in the north. People prepared both by arming themselves and by doing what they could to protect their loved ones. No black mobs ever arrived. Regardless, the rage that engulfed many whites was not satiated. Clan activity, relatively non-existent in the area before the Troubles, mushroomed. In addition to hunting down black victims, Klansmen held huge rallies and recruited hundreds of new members. Newspaper editors published reassurances that what had been done was not only justified, but was praiseworthy and necessary. The proud men and women of the King family coped as well as they could with their grief, keeping mostly to themselves.
Yeah, I remember my dad would bring the axe in the house at night. Every kind of thing to use for protection. We heard that all of the black people were coming down on the train one certain day, but I don't know when. But I know my dad was in town, and my brother and I were hoeing cotton or corn or something, and he happened to think about we were down there by Cedar Creek doing this, hoeing this little patch of corn, and he come home.
Eula was buried in the white dress her grandmother made for her graduation. Her large gravestone identified her as Eula King instead of Osley and was inscribed, "She was too good, too gentle and fair, to dwell in this cold world of care." Tension in the county remained high, with new shocking rumors circulating daily. Still, an explanation for what had happened and why it happened became accepted. The three men who were burned, as well as Shadrach Green, had all worked for John King at one time. The people of the town believed that the King men, particularly Otis, had treated blacks cruelly, beating them if they did not plow straight enough, pick enough cotton, or act sufficiently respectful. In turn, the three black men plotted revenge, and Eula's murder was the result. It was a narrative that was not based on any documented history, but it would serve the community for many decades to help assuage any remnant feelings of white guilt.
And I think if Mr. King hadn't mistreated those guys, it wouldn't have never happened either. He just mistreated them. I always heard. Now, I don't know how true it was. It was because of the fact that they had burned these guys And they were going to come in, and I guess.
I understand what I've heard that the king men were pretty domineering with their black people that worked for them. And they thought that would be the best way to get revenge on them because this girl's mother was already deceased.
A few weeks after Eula's murder, the King family got a surprise knock at their door. After all the other newspapers had moved on to other stories, a reporter named Dan Kelly from Waco, Texas, decided to give the story a second look. Things just didn't add up. There were some missing pieces to the narrative going around Curvin, and he was determined to find them, and find them he did. His conversation with John King turned this entire story on its ear. Nothing was as it seemed, and everything they thought they knew was about to change.